Hey there, and welcome to this episode of the iDeas podcast. You may have noticed this isn't how we usually start these episodes. Well, there's kind of a reason for that. Basically, the first quarter of this episode has been completely cut off during recording. Totally my bad. But anyway, you'll be joining the conversation as me and Zak are discussing what makes really great team leaders and senior leadership within the L&D function, why it's, probably shouldn't be a function within HR, and why the best leaders in that space usually aren't the experts in the team. They don't try to know everything, they don't try to be the best at everything. Now, Zak is a really interesting guy. This is actually the first time I'd ever spoken to him, so despite the first little bit of all the introductions being cut off, I would really encourage you to check him out on LinkedIn and online. All the details will be in the comments for this episode, but I'm sure we'll be working with him again on projects at some point. Without further ado, let's dive in and pick up where the conversation left off. I find that really interesting because the best manager I ever had in an L&D role, she openly kind of said, even when I started, I'm not the most knowledgeable L&D person here, I'm not the best at training, I'm not the best at e-learning design. She'd done a little bit of all of it, but openly stood there and said, I'm not the expert on the team, that's not my job. My job is to stand in front of you whenever anyone's throwing stuff at us and make sure you don't get hit. It's like, that acknowledgement goes an awfully long way. I think in attracting people who are willing to go, I want to do something completely different, let's give it a go.
Yeah.
And I think quite often we hear from organisations, we want a game changer, we want someone to come in and totally try something new, and then you get there and the job role goes, no, you do it our way. And that's not helpful for anyone, I don't think.
No. No, it's not.
It doesn't attract great talent in the long run either. So it's nice to hear managers allowing people to kind of spread their wings a little bit.
Yeah.
So in terms of your sort of changing tacks a little bit into some more specifics of role, your approach to content creation. Because everyone kind of has their own process, but also their own preferences. So when a request comes in and it's going to happen, what's your kind of kickoff point for, right, we're going to create something, now where do we go?
Yeah. So I think for me, in every role, it's always depended on the end system. Where is this content going to live? That's going to dictate how I approach building this content. For working in a remote role in a distributed workforce, everybody wants an e-learning. That is the number one thing I think across the profession right now. Everybody just wants everything in e-learning. And I think it's our job as instructional designers, as learning experience designers, learning architects, whatever name of the week we are using. It's our job to determine if that's the best course of action. Because not everything is a training need. Not everything is an e-learning. And I think, determining, that piece first is going to determine the rest of my content build. And really how I understand, the, request at hand. I've definitely been one to push back and be like, nope, this is not an e-learning. This is more of this, so we can do this. And 90% of the time, in my experience, the stakeholder's been like, all right, cool, let's do it. That's one of the things that I really value is that, on my team and, in my company, we're seen as the experts in what we do. So we are able to really kind of have those conversations where in other or organizations, those conversations are a little harder to have.
No, I think that's really cool. I think it's a frustration that I hear about a lot, is that people aren't seen in their organisations as the L&D experts, right? It tends to be more of a, hi, I want an e-learning on this topic, I want it to be 15 minutes, there you go. Here's my old PowerPoint, go forth and do. See you in a week or whatever it might be. And I've always kind of felt that there's two sides to that. There is, I think, often a legacy feeling in organisations that L&D are just there to take orders. which in fairness, in some part, we are a servant, I would argue, a servant part of the business. However, part of me does also think, what have you done to change that perspective or create the perspective that you want? So I guess my question would be, what do you do within the organisation to kind of show that you're the experts, and that people, when you make a suggestion, it's not just like a "this is what I feel like this week" kind of suggestion, and it's more of a "this is the right way to go"?
Yeah, so part of our process is just looking at the content that's already available, and we don't just walk up to the stakeholder in that meeting and be like, "Hey, this is based on your request. This is what I think it should be, and not what you originally requested." We come with the data. It's like, hey, X, Y, and Z already exists, so let's look at it from this angle, resurface some things, and then let's see what happens. It all goes back to being data informed, data driven. It's like we look at what's already there. We're like, okay, how's it being used? When is it being seen? And looking at that data to make that decision. It's like, okay, you know what? This e-learning is being seen by every new hire every time. So let's create a job aid to resurface the information that makes it a little quicker access for them. And then also let's put that job aid into that e-learning so they can save it from day one. And so it's like, we have to think strategically about what we do, because, there's only 5 designers for this or for all of Braze. So, we have to be strategic with our time.
No, I like that. I think so often that's what's missing, is it's not an immediate yes or no. I think so often we fall into being quite combative with the business, as if somehow it's L&D against the world, They all want us to do rubbish, and we want to do good stuff, and they're wrong, and we're right. And I get it. Being the hero of the story is appealing, right? Everyone wants to be, I'm sticking it to the man. I don't want to do e-learning.
Everybody wants to be a hero. But at the end of the day, our job is to support the business, and unless you have a very clearly defined monetary metric, every L&D function I've ever been a part of has been a non-revenue generating team. Therefore, especially looking at the state of the world now, being able to tie in what our actual our ROI is to a dollar amount is huge.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting you touch on that, because obviously there was a shockwave when TikTok, not a huge fan of TikTok as a business in general, but obviously they got rid of their L&D function. And there was the initial, oh my goodness. And then they kind of went, well, unfortunately, there was no value in this. And it was like, you mean there's no value in training? But I thought, actually, how many businesses would get rid of their L&D function if they turned around to them and said, could you please prove your value to this business? L&D went, we delivered 1,500 hours of training and all this kind of stuff. Right. But for that exact reason, that acknowledgement that we don't make money, therefore we have to justify value. I suspect there would be, if organisations took that approach, there would be a lot fewer L&D departments in the world.
I think there'd be a lot fewer, and I think there'd be a lot thinner, the departments.
Yes.
And I think with being able to tie it, I can't generate a dollar amount for the business one-to-one. But what I can do is build a course that makes a learner 37% faster to close their first deal. And based on those first closes from learners who have went through this course, I have indirectly affected revenue X way.
Yes.
So it's knowing how to read the data and knowing what the links are is vital for any L&D team.
Absolutely. I think having confidence in talking about money as well. I think we're always shy of saying anything about the money that we protect or help make within the business. And I guess because it's not a metric that we're used to talking about. But, I mean, we all know C-suite does not care how engaged your learners are. Not really. It might be a useful figure for you to know about, is content good or bad or whatever it might be, but actually at C-suite level, it's all about money. Of course it is. It's a business,
Right.
know. If you're not actually contributing to forward motion, especially in the economy we are going into at the moment, then you're contributing to backwards slide,
100%.
which is never good. So when you're having kind of those conversations with stakeholders and I guess SMEs to a certain extent as well, is that the kind of thing that you fold into those early conversations around what are we trying to achieve? Do you get down to that level of, financially, what is this course going to help within the business? Or maybe not finances specifically, but that level of metric early on? Or do you tend to find that something that you look for after the fact?
I think, I try to do it as early on as much as possible. Like, is there a business wide metric like for the quarter that this is going to directly impact and affect? Like, really tying it to those business goals, really tying it to the data that we know that we have is something that I try to do early and as often as possible. Am I perfect? Absolutely not, because I'm a spiritual being having a human experience and I mess it up a lot. But even at the end of the day, if I can go back and be like, okay, this course affects this behavior, which means it's going to affect this. Like, I should, as an L&D professional, be able to make those leaps.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think so often, certainly whenever we talk online about ourselves as L&D, we are perfect in our own minds. The solution is always the right solution. We always ascertain metrics and objectives up front. But I think you're right, especially in in-house L&D functions. I think because you can't just sit for a week thinking about the stuff. It's now. You're in a meeting. You've got to get going. You've got to move this project forwards.
And they're asking
chances
for
are
the
you're
finished
not.
product yesterday.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, the biggest shock to people entering the world of L&D right now is there seems to be a vision that it's this somewhat I don't know, almost like a utopian work environment in L&D where there's no pressure and the business totally respects you at all times and you've got a reasonable timeline for all your projects. I don't think I've ever done a project with a reasonable timeline,
No,
or at least
right.
what I would define as one.
Right, and I think a lot of it, that also looks into like this L&D, operational thinking. It's like, what is the workload of my team? Like, these timelines, are they reasonable? Are they unreasonable because like the business is like kind of behind and like L&D is being brought to the table at the end of a project, and then it's like, by the way, we've just completed this massive overhaul of a thing. You now have a week to like get everybody trained up and a course out, or whatever the case may be. And I think a lot of it is us, understanding where we're going as a team, but also where we're going as an industry. There is no industry that is a utopia. If you think that's what L&D is, I need you to like take a step back and really look at things and actually talk to people who are in it day to day. Like, I think, we have some really great people on LinkedIn and other places that are really talking about some really great and powerful things within the industry. However, those are that's 5,000 feet up from where you are at the bottom of this L&D mountain.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's funny, this is kind of exactly the reason why we do this and why, like, we did the IDTX conference for the last 2 years, for this exact reason. Because that, as you say, that kind of 5,000 mile view is really useful, but not practical at the moment for most of us. Most of us, whilst we like to think at that level, are in actual fact loading up Storyline tomorrow and creating something that needs to be done in about 6.5 hours. Of course, you'll get to do more cool stuff. But trying to create a multi-level L&D strategy on your first week in role is probably not going to happen. Just throwing it out there. It's unlikely.
No, it's really not. And I think like one of the best things that like really early like L&D folks can do is like find one thing that you really want to hone, like, and really kind of like bring to the table, that is going to kind of set you apart if you're trying to break in. Like anybody can take a course on storyline and learn how to do storyline. Anybody can learn the tools, but like, are you really into like animation and using tools like Animaker or Beyond, and you make really sick videos that like no one else on that team is doing? Are you like a part-time graphic designer and you like design all of your own images and that's something you bring to the table? Cool. It's no longer good enough just to know the tools.
I definitely agree with that. I think I was chatting with someone earlier today, and they were talking about kind of tools that they need to learn before moving into L&D. I kind of just thought it's interesting because I knew none before I pursued a career. It just wasn't the process. I learned about learning and about training and that kind of stuff, and then I got into role and went, so what tool do we need to learn? Because it's software. You know,
right.
Like, I'm not going to say that it's easy. Easy is a dangerous word when you talk about this software, but it's not rocket science. Let's be honest.
No,
you know?
like my first e-learning authoring tool was Captivate. So like, because that's what the business was using. So I had to learn Captivate real quick, fast, in a hurry. You know what you can't do? Learn Captivate real quick, fast, in a hurry. But like, you know, starting my stuff on hard mode allowed me to like make a lot of really dumb mistakes early and really kind of figure out like, okay, like, and also constantly sitting there thinking there's got to be an easier way to do this. So it's this whole thing of like the tools, anybody can learn the tool. It's learning what the business is using and what tools the business is using that you're applying to or trying to break into, to understand what their actual needs are and also what you're able to do. Like, I've seen so often people want to promise things that they can do in Captivate. Great, but we use Storyline here, so what do you got for me?
Yeah. I think it's almost like what we discussed right at the start of the episode. It's about figuring out which of your skills apply to everything. And I tend to find, especially in our world, a lot of people come with like an interesting skill from an unrelated or seemingly unrelated role or hobby, you know? Like one of the most interesting people I ever worked with, I actually brought her in for a very specific project where we were doing comedy songs for health and safety courses. Like you'll never find that on we require you to be able to list. But for that solution, for that company, it was perfect. And she'd never worked in L&D before. Her whole company is now comedy songs for L&D. That's brilliant. What an incredibly specific thing. Doesn't touch an authoring tool. Closest she gets is Pro Tools. Which we wouldn't have on our authoring tool list, or not many of us have on our authoring tool list, realistically. So yeah, I think it's a prime example of it's those transferable skills for what a business might need that it's all about. And any opportunity to sing about fire extinguishers, take it. It may never come again.
100%.
You may only ever do it once, but it'll be good fun. So I mean, we kind of touched a bit on the tech side of stuff there. And I find that the kind of ed tech, because it has its own name, it's not just technology, apparently. The ed tech space I find to be a little messy at the moment, maybe would be the term. So when you are looking at technologies or considering, you know, what you're looking for, well, what are you looking for in a new bit of technology you might want to start using?
The very first thing is like, is it solving something that I'm dealing with right now? Is it going to make my life easier? Is it going to make my life quicker? Is it going to do something that's going to have an immediate positive impact? And then like the number two thing is, how well does this new tool integrate with what I already use? Because I think something like that one thing that we as an industry, I don't think do super well is really look at our learning and development tech stack and figure out how all the tools work together and figure out what is pulling from what and where. Like, I've been a video gamer my entire life, so knowing how things work in and out has been something I've always loved. and it's something that I've been able to bring to like L&D and be like really understand how these things integrate, how these things work together. And like, does this new tool work with my e-learning authoring tool? Does it work with my LMS? Does it like how hard is the integration? Is it a simple like flip on by the vendor, or do I have to build out a custom API or webhook to get the information and get the data for it to work correctly? Like, ease of use is really the name of the game now, because if it's not easy for me to use you and then use the output in another tool, I don't have time for it.
I that's so interesting, because I think that's been a major shift. I think for a long time it was, or it's still now, unfortunately to a certain extent, there's a lot of, I would say, flash. We can do X, Y, and Z. You can do X, Y, and Z. I see this a lot in the XAPI space, especially, where we do XAPI. It's like, do you, or can I just export it in that format? You know, are we talking you can do XAPI manually with a JavaScript box? Which is great fun, as we all know. Or like, actually, is it a couple of buttons? You know? Exactly.
Like, you know, which is like, there's like, do I have to dig into my old days of MySpace coding to really like thank God I grew up in that timeline, because I didn't know that skill was going to serve me at 35, and learning and knowing how to code color and font and everything in HTML. Had no clue it was going to help me, but by God, right now, it's the lifesaver.
Do you know, it's interesting that, because I was chatting a couple of weeks ago to someone about kind of computer and technology literacy, and the kind of we often think, oh, the youngest generation has the highest level of tech literacy, and actually I think the workplace is going to have a little bit of a shock with that, because they don't. Technology has gone through this weird curve where, yes, definitely, I think we were probably part of a generation where MySpace came along, and so because you were going to be totally unique and individual, so you tailored your MySpace page with music so people could understand your soul and things like this, which was great fun. But because the technology was fairly limited, you did have to go and figure stuff out and Google it and get some basic HTML and maybe a bit of CSS under your belt, not really knowing that that's what you were doing, but you needed to. Mm-hmm. From kind of the Facebook point of the internet onwards, it's been a gradual loss of that, I think. Everything is now so turn it on and it goes, that we're actually now looking at potentially a couple of generations of people who don't very often use an actual keyboard and mouse. Everything's touchscreen or mobile. The idea of coding is often not there, unless they've shown a particular interest. I think if you've shown a particular interest, actually now you can learn a lot more. But I think it is going to be interesting in the workplace. I think we're actually going to have to do a lot more basic computer literacy training in the coming years.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just going to depend on like what industry you're in, who your end users are. Like, tech right now generally trends young, but if you look at a business vertical like healthcare, look at, like, that tends to trend on the older side. So there you may need to do some of those like basic computer literacy skills a lot sooner than you would in like the tech space.
Yeah, I suppose that's quite interesting, because I think a lot of the workforces that I have worked for have been on the extremes. So it's been engineering, like field engineering, so they're maybe not the most tech savvy, a lot of them, because they're putting water pipes in and have been for the past 30 years, but neither does their job require them to be. Or it's been contact center agents, young people who are like, yeah, no, I got it, this is a keyboard, I know what that does, we're good, off we go. But yeah, it's again another example of how that industry can make such a difference. So we kind of touched on tech stack then, and I'm glad you did, because I very rarely hear people outside of tech or like product design talk about the stacks. And I think it's something L&D should think about a little bit more. So talking about tech stack, I mean, can you tell us a little bit, I'm sure you can't tell us everything, but a little bit about the tech stack that you work with at the moment and why you use those things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like, I think any good tech stack's going to have a, learning it's going to be made up of like a couple different pillars, like where is your content housed? Which also indicates how learners access it, what your main like authoring tool is, and then what your ancillary design tools are. Because there's no single authoring tool that's going to do everything that you want it to do. So being able to use some ancillary tools to kind of supplement that is going to be key. Right now, we're using just your standard LMS, with a couple bells and whistles that we're turning on and testing. We're using, right now we're using Storyline and Articulate as our like eLearning authoring tool. Like, not a big deal. Almost everybody does now. And then we have, we're fortunate enough that we do have access to some of the bigger, like, design pro tools and things of that nature. So for me personally, like, I love a good moment in Creative Cloud, the Adobe Creative Cloud Express. I think it's a really rad, quick tool for people who are not graphic designers, but need to do something quick. I love a good video animation and like voiceover with music. So like I'm using, I have a drag and drop animation tool that I use that I spend a lot of time in, which has been a lot of fun to build out custom characters for each like department and like really kind of like build in some like thought chains. So I think like when we're thinking of the L&D tech stack, it's that where do things live? How are we building it? And also, where are we getting the data? Those are the three pillars. And if you can solve those three things, like your L&D tech stack's going to be solid. Yeah. The linchpin is, though, all three of those have to work together. And it's got to be a seamless thing. Like, if there's a manual process between any two, your tech stack needs work.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I find there's a lot of focus, generally speaking, put on tools. It's all about the authoring tools, the design software, and I get why. They're fun and cool, right? It's far more exciting to talk about that than it is to talk about the back end of an LMS and how single sign-on's going to work and all this kind of stuff. But I think that focus that you're talking about, how it all connects, is so important because that's actually the one bit of the technology that's going to impact your end user the most.
Exactly.
Because actually, it really doesn't matter what you create if the platform you put it on sucks. We're back to MySpace. Good example.
Exactly.
There was a lot of great stuff on MySpace, but unfortunately, it sucked. So as soon as an alternative came up, away everyone went.
Exactly.
Now for a more up-to-date reference. Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of thought that everything you create is going to be seen through the lens of the LMS. And to me, like, single sign-on in 2022 is non-negotiable. I kind of always think if I ever try to log in something, it's like, we don't do single sign-on. It's like, then goodbye. And I get that it's not a typical L&D consideration. It's perhaps more of an IT thing, or we often think, but actually it is part of our user experience.
Right. And like, I think we miss the mark if in L&D we're not thinking of these IT considerations, if we're not thinking about how like we work with the rest of the business and how our tools affect others. Like, I think it's a huge miss, because if we're not thinking about those things, like you said, it's going to impact the end learner more than likely in a negative way that we can't come back from. Because if that end user, that end learner experience is piss poor, there's nothing that we can do to come back from that.
No, absolutely. I always think back to my first ever experience of Cornerstone. And this was a long time ago, where it was like, so how many clicks to get to my course? 13. I sat there just thinking, nope, sorry, not doing this. So it was like, so do we want to keep this? It's like, no, we don't. I'm told it's improved, but even now, I mean, we're talking 8 years later, I still just, Cornerstone, nope. I won't even consider it, just because of the power of that experience, and that's probably unfair. I should probably revisit it. but
yes
it does
and no,
show
right?
you the power of that.
Exactly, and it's like the reason why people leave bad restaurant reviews, but not good ones. It's because we remember psychologically negative experiences easier than we do positive ones because of how it like reacts in our brain. So our learners are the exact same way. They're going to recognize and remember that negative experience they had much sooner, and they're going to talk about it just like, but not as much as if they had a positive experience.
Definitely, definitely. We are rapidly coming up on the hour. That has flown past, isn't it? So I always like to finish up with a couple of questions I asked everyone. So right now, when you look at the L&D and the learning space, what is it that you see and get excited about? What is it that you see and think, yes, I want more of this?
I'm seeing a lot more like, specificity within the field. I'm seeing more and more like L&D ops roles, and really like this like L&D technologist, like a learning technologist that focuses solely on the tech stack. Like that's exciting because I think we are way overdue for both of those kind of operationalized and essential roles, especially now in 2022 with as distributed as our workforces are.
Awesome. No, I think that's a really positive trend, and hopefully we see some more of it. Fantastic. And I think this has been fantastic. I think there's loads to think about and take away from this. If people want to get in touch with you, where can they do that online?
They can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm that's pretty much my primary go-to is LinkedIn. Follow, like, comment, and interact from there.
Fantastic. We'll make sure there is a link in the description for this episode. Just want to say thank you again for making the time for joining us.
Absolutely. It was a blast. Thank you so much, Tom.
Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of the iDeas podcast. I really appreciate you sticking around despite the technical issues I had with the recording at the start. Please let us know in the comments what you're taking away from this conversation. And if you did enjoy it, remember to hit that like button before you go.